I seriously do not know what to do. I do not know what happened to my little brother, and I don't know how to fix this. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I should start at the beginning with some background information. My family is not really the conventional kind. You see, I am 25 and I just got a baby brother 3 years ago. Kind of a big age gap, I know. Normally, it's hard for a bond to be formed with that much gap. Generally, it's almost like the kid would just be a single child. Thing is, I did not want that to happen. I made sure I was involved in his life from day one. I would take Justin for a weekend to spend time with him, and was involved as much as my mom and stepfather was. I was their go-to babysitter and treated him as if he was my child almost. I even moved to California, to a small blink-and-you-miss-it town in rural Kansas to be nearby. I worked as a help desk technician, so I could work from anywhere with a net connection. Luckily, despite being in the middle of BFE, they had decent net. I guess given the nearest landmark was a rather large pile of cow dung. I kid there, no one gauges that sort of thing, and while I hope not anyways. I am digressing here, sorry. My mind is having a hard time these days after what happened. I'm losing my grip on sanity. That is why I am writing this. If I do finally go nutter butters, I want the truth to be down on paper at least somewhere. I need to get this out somewhere, even if no one believes me. Whatever it was, it had everyone fooled. I would normally scrounge around in thrift stores in the nearby towns for Disney movies or any kind of movies I could find. I had found a large haul this week. 9 tapes, yes, VHS tapes. It's a thrift store, DVDs do happen, but let's face it, ancient tech is more their style. 3 Disney movies I remembered from childhood: The Jungle Book, 101 Dalmatians, and Pinocchio. There were 3 videos of Blue's Clues in there, and while I loathed to watch this show, he loved it, so I was happy to make that sacrifice. The other 3 were of a show I did not recognize. It had a cartoon mouse drawn in a similar fashion to the original Mickey Mouse, except they called him Bumbo the Singing Mouse. The tapes were titled Bumbo the Mouse and the Singing Forest, Bumbo the Mouse and the Slippery Slide, and Bumbo the Mouse Visits the Time Town, chalking it up to a Mickey Mouse ripoff. I took them thinking he was 3 and would watch anything that was animated. When he visited, he would always enjoy curling up with me on the couch and watching cartoons. He had just had his 3rd birthday and was just starting to talk last year and was struggling a bit for complex sentences, but made his wants known with basic ones. Bubba up, Bubba TV, this word for TV, Bubba hugs, that kind of thing. My mom had just dropped him off for a weekend with me. Needing some time alone from the kiddo always suited me. It meant more time with him. Friday night progressed normally. I showed him the Disney movies, and we watched these until his bedtime, avoiding mentioning Blue's Clues as long as possible. Screw that dog and its blue skidoo. The next morning, things went downhill fast. I put in the first of the Bumbo movies, Bumbo the Mouse and the Singing Forest. It started off pretty normally for an old cartoon. The titular character taking a walk along a street, everything around him sentient and bobbing up and down with the character to the background music. Bumbo sang in a weird gibberish. I honestly could not make it out, but Justin clapped along with the show, happy as can be, shrugging it off to normal cartoon weirdness or limitations to technology back then, and I paid it no more mind. Bumbo kept walking for a minute or two, singing along, when the screen flashed for just a second. I could barely make out any shapes or anything. It was just a weird flash. I figured, being an old VHS, the tape was damaged or something. It happened about 2 more times in a few seconds, then stopped as Bumbo reached the forest. The trees were drawn in the same style, having eyes and mouth, and were bouncing back and forth to the same background beat of the show. The first few trees were normal, but it was not until a little bit in that they started to get dark. The first tree had a cartoony skeleton hanging from it. It was dancing along with the music notes coming from his mouth to imply he was singing too. Okay, not that normal, but I had seen worse in cartoons. And a 3-year-old would not know what that was. More and more hanging skeletons showed on the screen. Similar fashion, except some were darker, looking more charred than anything else. I was starting to feel uneasy about Justin watching this any further. The last thing I need was having him having nightmares after all. God, I wish that was the extent of it now. From behind, the tree's figures stepped out. They were dressed in shite sheets and pointed hoods. They were Klansmen. This definitely wasn't a child's cartoon anymore. I stood up to walk across the room and eject the tape. That is when the screen flashed again, and suddenly the Klansmen attacked Bumbo. They charged and decapitated him, blood spraying from his neck in a ridiculous fashion. They hacked and chopped at Bumbo with machetes. Before I could get to the VCR and hit eject, they had chopped Bumbo into a cartoony gore pile. I furiously hit the eject button, but it would not eject. The thing liked to stick on me a lot, but I knew if I had kept pushing, it would eventually kick the tape out. I stole a glance at Justin as I was, hoping he was okay after being subjected to the bizarre cartoon. He was staring transfixed, as in a daze. I waved my other hand in front of him to catch his attention. Nothing. Great. I reached around to the VCR's plug to pull it from the wall. When I grabbed the cord, I received a very painful shock. I reached for it again and received another shock. Then Justin spoke in a freakishly deep adult voice. "Do not touch it again." I looked at Justin dumbfounded. I had to be hearing things, but no, he turned his little head to me and smiles a huge, unnatural grin. "You won't like the next one if you touch that cord again. Let the movie finish." It took a second, but I made up my mind. Something was seriously wrong here. Instead of the VCR, I attempted to turn off the TV. As I touched the power button, I felt a sharp twinge in my left hand, the one touching the TV. It took a second, but when the initial shock was over, I was missing the finger that touched the button. I stood gaping at my hand, now one digit short and bleeding in a small stream down my arm. I rushed over and grabbed a rag from the kitchen in the next room, putting pressure on the wound. This rudimentary step done, I took some duct tape from one of the drawers and wrapped it to keep the rag in place and supply pressure. I could still move the rest of my hand a little, but it hurt like hell. The odd thing to this was that Justin had remained silent this entire time. A child should, I do not know, cry or something seeing that, but no, there was just that tape playing. Screw the tape. I had completely forgot it was still running. I ran into the living room, determined to get Justin away from the tape if some supernatural being was preventing me from turning it off. There, as Justin, standing in his pajamas, staring at the screen of the TV, my finger in his mouth. When I stepped into the room, he turned to look at me, to stare at me dead in the eyes. After a second, he swallowed my finger whole. In the shock of this, I did not realize his eyes were milky white. Like the iris and pupil were gone. He smiled a huge smile, some blood dripping from his lips. I suddenly felt lightheaded and I fell to my knees, arms stopping me from falling to my face afterwards. I was staring at the carpet for a second and then I looked up to look at Justin, trying to ignore the lightheaded, dizzy feeling I suddenly had. There was Justin, pupilless eyes looking straight at mine. We must have stared at each other for a good minute in silence. I could not tell you what I was thinking in that time, but the next thing I knew, it was the next morning. I was alone in my living room, staring at a blank TV screen while sitting on my couch. My phone was in my hand, with a conversation I didn't remember having taken place between me and my mom. It seems they had come and picked up Justin a couple hours ago. We had texted about how I had an accident with a kitchen knife, gone to the ER to get stitches, all while taking care of Justin. She asked the normal, "Are you okay?" questions, and then asked how Justin was doing. I had no memory of a completely normal conversation. I furiously tapped on the screen. The message, "Is Justin doing okay?" A few minutes later, my mom responded with, "Yeah, he's doing completely fine. He won't stop watching those tapes you got him, though." My heart stopped. I looked over to my TV, and where I had placed out all 3 Bumbo tapes to watch was just an empty space. "You mean the Bumbo tapes?" I responded, and nervously awaited her response. "Yeah, it's a dumb little cartoon, but a mouse walking and singing. I do not see why he loves it so much, but he won't stop watching them. Good find on those. Thanks for letting us take them with us, too. I do not know why he got so upset before when we were going to leave before without them, but whatever, I guess. Justin had been the perfect child since then. He never cries. He has learned to speak clearly now and is even reading. I do not know why I know, but I know that isn't Justin. Not anymore. He has not come over much anymore, and honestly, I am fine with that. He keeps my mom and stepfather so busy that they have not had time to drop him off or anything, and they surprisingly haven't said anything about it. They have changed as well. I basically have been ignored since that night. I may get a short response to a text or something, but that is it. Whatever it is, it's changed them too. I know it. What is even weirder in all of this is my finger stump. It really did have stitches on it. They looked just like what you would get from a doctor. It had even been bandaged perfectly. How the hell did that happen? How did it do that, and why? I don't honestly know what to do anymore. I have contemplated moving away, forgetting my family, forgetting everything that happened, and start new. Every time I think I come to a decision, I think of Justin, before the tapes. Should I try to free them from whatever has a grip on them? Should I run? I don't know. Someone help me, please. Tell me what I have to do. What happened to Justin and my family? I was honestly torn. My heart and everything I had thought was right in me told me to find a way to save them if possible. My mind and survival instincts told me to run fast and far and never look back. It took weeks of crippling depression, hearing his "I love you, Bubbas" in my head, and many, many sleepless nights racked with guilt to make up my mind. As if whatever this was knew I made up my mind to do something. After I came to my decision, I started seeing Bumbo's face in the mirror, looking back at me, smiling at me. At first I thought I was going crazy. After all, my sanity had certainly been slipping after seeing some sort of demonic possession in my 13-year-old brother and family. Whose wouldn't? It started as just Bumbo smiling at me, but as time went on, he would start to reach out for me. He was not always there, but you can bet as soon as I got complacent and thought it was over, there he was, and smiling. He would be reaching out his cartoonish white-gloved hand at me, trying to grab me through the glass. I would always run out of the room, man enough to admit this scared the hell out of me. Despite all this, I decided I had to save them somehow, taking advice from this group to heart. Well, at least the practical advice. I'm definitely not watching the tapes myself again. I do not know why they did not affect me, but I am not taking that chance again. Honestly, though, I could not continue with this guilt. I had already been contemplating suicide, and I am ashamed to admit even bought a gun for it. I do not know if it was my big brother instincts to save him, or my idiotic attempt at redemption. Since I am the one that brought that horrible cartoon into our lives, I felt I should be the one to fix it. I decided I should start with researching anything I could about Bumbo. Knowledge is power, as they say, and I held on to hope this was true. I started by scouring every search engine site I knew about for anything mentioning him. Nothing came up. Not one single person mentioning him. I tried searching the tapes minus his name, and nothing. To the world, this Bumbo the Singing Mouse did not exist. I spent hours looking through old-style cartoon characters, hoping maybe that I could find a picture of him. Maybe he started with a different name or something, like many cartoon icons still around today. No luck. I tried looking up Cartoon Mouse, knowing this would take a long time. I was not disappointed in that aspect. After hours of searching through images of Mighty Mouse, Mickey Mouse, many other cartoon iconic mice, and even things like The Secret of Nim, I hit pay dirt. One image, one drawing that looked like Bumbo. It was crudely done, and it was a very old picture, but it was him. I could not mistake the face of the creature haunting me at every turn, and that turned my world around into this waking hell. I clicked on the image only to receive a 404 error. No, this could not go into a dead end after all this time searching. After probably hundreds of attempts and clicking, refreshing, modem resetting, and browser changing, I stumbled onto something I did not think of. I had saved the website as a Word document, hoping to find a back door into it. There in the core, hidden in the very crude and erroneously crafted coding, no wonder it had a 404 error, was a name. Jason Hester Quantrill. Finally a lead. I spent hours then learning all I could about this man. Apparently he did not have a wiki page. No, that would be too easy. But through some persistent searching and finally expanding my search into the dark web, I found a site that spoke about him. It was a website called wonderkinderproject1951.org. The site was crude, looking more like a lengthy Word document than a web page, but it told me the story of how Bumbo the Singing Mouse, his creators, and a lot more I wish I did not read. I will summarize the story here, in case anyone comes across a copy of these tapes too. If you do not learn from my mistakes, you should at least know the story behind it and find a better way to deal with it than I probably will. Jason Hester Quantrill was a direct descendant of William Quantrill. He was born in 1930 in a small town in Arkansas named Bradley, Arkansas. Because of his ties to the Southern Party and the subsequent rise of the KKK in Arkansas, Jason swept up into its ranks at a young age. Like his ancestor, he too was a violent man. He was suspected in many lynchings, burnings, murders, and rapes of people of color in Texas, Missouri, and Arkansas. He was never found guilty. There's always been a lack of evidence. He rose in the ranks of the KKK quickly due to its heritage, brutality, and utter devotion to their ideals. He made it to the rank of Grand Wizard by the age of 21, a feat not ever reproduced to this day still. It was in 1951, after the end of World War II when the U.S. brought over Nazi scientists, that he met a name known as Friedrich Gutenkinder. Though you won't find this name anywhere else, I searched extensively. It is because he was invited to live in America. One of the stipulations was he had to change his name in an attempt to fit in, being as the German atrocities were still fresh in everyone's mind. All records of Frederick were destroyed in the fall of the Reich, and apparently only the site I was reading had any information of his original name, since from what I learned, he wanted to keep his experiments like this far from his new American persona. This man became Henry East, a nuclear scientist at a government base in Arkansas. The two met, and because of their shared interests, became fast friends. Henry had not gave up on his passion for human experimentation. The two came up with the idea to wipe the minds of children, producing complacent-minded, docile children that could have been brainwashed to support and love the Klan and Nazi ideals fervently, almost fanatically. They managed to recruit several other Nazi scientists and some of the more intelligent members of the KKK to run a clandestine experiment. They ran a series of experiments for years on Jewish and colored children of the surrounding states, calling these children expendable, since they were less than human in the first place in their eyes. Their first experiment was with drug-laced water and audio recordings of childhood fables, with intermittent propaganda messages woven into the tales themselves. The children of this experiment were locked in a concrete bunker, strapped to chairs, and only given drugged water and bread to live subsist on. 14 children were exposed to these tapes 24/7 for a week. This produced no results, despite children with beginning signs of malnourishment. They pushed the experiment to a month. On the third week, one of the children managed to break their own hands to escape the bindings. So intoxicated from the drug, they apparently felt no pain, and attacked the other children. For an entire week, this child killed and ate the other children locked down with it. It remained unknown to the scientists running the experiment for this time because they had decided to add a new variable in an attempt to get results: hunger. For the final week, the delivery of the bread was cut off from the chamber. When they finally opened the bunker to check on the experiment's results, they found 13 corpses in varying states of decay and consumption, with one child curled into the corner, snarling and staring at them, caked in blood and human tissue. They wrote the experiment off as a failure and terminated the remaining test subject. The bunker was cleaned up, and they progressed to another experiment. This was similar to the other, but instead of stories, they were subjected to German-made cartoons littered with Nazi propaganda. They locked 14 more children into this bunker, again making these children subsist on bread and drugged water. Again, there were similar results. One child escaped and attacked the other children, though this was caught much earlier due to the scientists actually checking on the children on a at least fairly normal basis. The scientists terminated the feral child, removed both bodies, and continued the experiment. At the end of the month, all children were found to have committed suicide. They had all bit their tongues off in between the scientists' checks. Several versions of this experiment were attempted, using various mediums to expose the children to the propaganda. All experiments ended the same way. After countless failures, East eventually turned to less conventional means. Remembering tales of the Nazi Empire experimenting with the occult, he consulted some local heretical church leaders and foreign contacts. It was through this that alternative means to reach out to the children was developed. With the help of a voodoo bokar and a high leader of a local satanic cult, the scientist developed a supernatural way to imprint minds with messages. These voodoo and satanic rites and ritual symbols were imprinted along the film, along with the propaganda into a mimic of a children's cartoon star, and created the exact thing East was attempting: mind control. The downside is, this did not have the intended results entirely. Apparently, only 1 out of every 42 kids, or 1 child out of every 3 of the child experiment batches, achieved the desired result of a complacent Nazi sympathetic zealot. The rest had some varied results. 20 of the kids apparently went completely mad, gnawing their own hands off to escape the cuffs, only to die from subsequent blood loss before the end of the movie. Another 10 died from internal brain issues. Autopsies confirmed these children's brain appeared clawed at, bits missing from the temporal lobe or chunks of the cortex. This was normally impossible, since the children expressed no further injuries besides this, and blood leaking from their navel cavities. 9 of these children went into epileptic-like fits, spasming until they expired, usually by swallowing or biting their own tongues off in the fit. The remaining 2 of these children had the worst of the results. These children seemed to exhibit no issues at all, no death, no complacency, no external or mental issues at all. They moved these children from the experiment room and held them in separate observation rooms for several weeks. While solitarily confined, these children were very docile. They exhibited no signs of any issue at all, playing like normal children would. The only noticeable changes were these children would often utter words in an unidentifiable language in their sleep. None of the staff was a linguistic expert, but several had working theories that it was ancient Latin or Sumerian. This has yet to date been confirmed according to a side note. It was when the children were allowed interaction with other children or site scientists that their issues became presented. In one occurrence, one of the children, dubbed Subject Cain, watched as a scientist approached their dining table with a tray of food. The scientist placed the tray down, and in the moment between the scientist looking at the table where he laid the tray and looking up at Cain, had cleared the 10-foot distance in space. In another almost blurred instant, Cain lunged at the scientist and ripped his throat out. The next moments, the child was seen sitting in the gore of the scientist's remains, happily chewing on some meat while coloring along the walls with the blood. It was after this that only expendable, non-scientist, and usually kidnapped minority subjects were used to interact with either child subject directly. Another notable instance was the subject Lilith. This subject had a tendency to be far more unpredictable. She would have moments of instability where she would suddenly attack the walls or the observation areas, though not managing to cause any noticeable physical damage. In one experiment to see how the child would act with another living being, they introduced a young German Shepherd puppy to the child's room. Lilith seemed hesitant at first to interact with the puppy. The puppy as well showed extreme fear of Lilith, backing away to a corner and actually wetting itself. Lilith approached the puppy with slow, careful movements. She would often stop and smell the air around her, as if an animal hunting or searching for something. As she neared approximately half the distance to the animal, she closed the rest in the blink of an eye. Before any observer knew what was going on, the animal's head was severed from its body and hurled at the area where the observation staff stood. The animal's body and cranial fluids obscured their view for a few moments, and in that time, as the visceral eventually slid down the observational glass, they saw Lilith floating in the air, staring directly at them, despite the glass only being one-way in visibility and being 10 feet above the ground of the cell. After this instance, 2 of the 5 observers actually committed suicide. There were many documented occurrences along those lines. I will not go into them all, but suffice it to say these children were definitely not okay. Ultimately, the project was deemed far too unpredictable and costly to implement, and he shut it down, and after 2 years of experimentation. The subjects of the experiment were destroyed, and the one child that the experiment was successful was actually let back into the general populace. The child was classified able in the experiment, but was not mentioned much really. There were some basic notes as far as physiology and vitals, but little else. To add a candle to the horrible cake, I discovered was that there was only one mention of the 3 tapes created in this endeavor. They were all labeled as missing at the end of the subject's status information. I have come to realize that what has happened to Justin and my family is definitely supernatural in origin, and my best guess is he turned out like the subjects, Cain and Lilith. I have no clue what I'm going to do, honestly. My first idea is doing a lot, and I mean a lot, of research on how the hell to exorcise demons. I cannot exactly ask a priest, given I would likely be thrown in an institution and be unable to at least try to help my family. I also need to find those tapes and destroy them. If I survive this, I will write down what happened here. If you are the praying kind, I could use any help I can get. I sincerely doubt I can do this, but I at least have to try. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave me a comment to let me know, or give the video a like. Until next time, stay spooked.